why do we remember that? I just want you to keep that in your head while we have this conversation. Carmen, thank you on Bridges Live with Dr. Paul Dyer. Thank you for coming on my show.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. You know, we're in a voting season, and it's been a voting season since the primary. We're having a primary coming up, and January is right on our heels. But there's many things that people don't understand, like who was the first and how did it get there. To me, like I was just talking about Ida Wells. She was a journalist. She was just one of the first to really get in and to be that woman entrepreneur and a journalist at that. And not many people know who Ida Wells is. They don't often talk about her at all. But my mother was all about the way she, I guess in those times, the way she fought and how she fought. But she fought to give people the information so they can make a decision and a choice. You and your family, you're a product of a woman being the first. So let's talk about that.
Great. And I'm very familiar with Ida B. Wells, because I'm from Chicago and they have the Ida B. Wells community there, welfare community projects.
Right.
So you want me to talk about my mommy?
Yes.
My mother is a dynamic person. I idolize her in every way. She's the mother of 5 children, and I am the youngest of the 5 children. 3 are deceased of my siblings. 2 of us are still living, myself and my sister. My mother, I was raised in the Cabrini Green projects.
There you go. That's Chi-Town, people.
All right now.
If people don't know what Cabrini Green is, that's Chi-Town. My father used actually to patrol that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was born in Cook County. Most of the people know I'm a New Yorker, but I was born in Cook County. I come from the South Side of Chicago. So my dad was a Black Panther in Chicago. My mother was an activist in Chicago. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So as a product of Chicago, I went to college, the first in my family to go to college. And my mother fought for me to go to college. She had to fight for me to be educated well enough to get in. And I've been active in the civil rights movement since grade school. I fought to integrate a grade school in the Cabrini Green projects, not in the projects, but right across the street.
What year was this?
Well, I'm 70 years old. So at 5, 6, I'm going to say about 6 or 7 years old when I integrated one of the schools. The way Chicago Cabrini Green is laid out, it's the poorest community. Mm-hmm. But we are up against the richest community, the Gold Coast. Right. And literally, for lunch from school, we would walk to the Gold Coast and get our Sammy hot dogs. Greasy, cheap, high-calorie hot dogs and French fries. And so I kind of got my toe in both worlds. I lived in the poorest part, but I got to rub hands and get to know a little bit about the rich part, and to learn about how the rich live. Because I remember asking my mom, I'm like, why do the rich people want to live in the coldest part of the city, which is the Gold Coast, because it's right off of Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And I said, for example, Oprah Winfrey. She said, honey, those people have cars that take them into their elevators and let them off on their floor. And they park next to their apartments. They don't get to feel the cold. And when Oprah Winfrey gets in her car on the Lakeshore Drive, she drives straight into an underground parking garage in her studio. The cold, no cold phases them. So I just found that just, hilarious. But my mother, Um, she was a Cabrini Green mama. She fought for everything Cabrini Green could have. She fought for our kids going to different schools. She was the first African American woman in the United States to run for Congress with 5 children and single. And I asked my mom, how could you afford that? Because I'm thinking of what elections cost today.
Well, let's slow down just a little bit. When you say she was the first, now that's the one thing I want people to really highlight. Like, so what year is this? And for her to be the first, most people must think about, wasn't there others? And there wasn't.
No. I don't have my stats in front of me.
That's okay, because most people think of like Fannie Lou Hamer.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't run for Congress. She ran for to be a president.
Right.
There's a difference. Right. It's not the first person that ran for an office. We're talking about the first black woman to run for Congress.
Right. Well, my mother has always told me, run for something, even if it's for dog catcher, because that's where the decisions are made.
Right.
And we need to understand that. She also told me, don't waste your time arguing with people that can't make a decision. You move on. And she gave me a wealth of knowledge to operate by. Now, when she became the first African American to run for Congress, she didn't win. But it was not an honest campaign by far. My mother was literally, when we were out campaigning one day, we got in a cab to go home, and the cab driver closed his door on her coat and drug her about a mile. And we were running behind the car trying to get him to stop. We really feel it was intentional. And he finally stopped, and she was hurt, but not to the degree of dying or anything like that, but she was hurt. That's just one example of the violence that's portrayed against you when you are a black woman stepping out of your place. Mm. You have no place in this world to do more than a white man.
But here's the thing. Prior to, and that is still so true to today. Even though there's many black women who have stepped out and who have made a place, I would say it that way. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like, well, what about this woman or that one? And I'm not going to mention those names because they may be popular, but there's still certain places that they still can't go. And I don't care how popular they are, how much money they think they have, or the billions, or all the magazines they have started. They still have a place where they're being controlled also. So there's still a place. So without mentioning those names, in the household, and I think this is so key, I want you to talk about it, is in the household, your mother had a drumbeat of verbiage that she kept talking about slow cooking, right? So she slow cooked you kids. Prior to her running, she had said, you got to run for something and stand for something. It just sounds like your mother was similar to my mom, and that's why she was such a high activist. That's why she was such a person in the community. It was about making a difference. What was that slow drumbeat your mother had?
Well, a little bit of her history is that she was born in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. So she... some of her siblings and family were actually slaves. She said she was never a slave, but many of her family members, of course, were. So the activism came with her from the South. And there's endless family stories about how they were treated in the South and how my family fled to Chicago. And so my mother, raising us boys, She had two sons, both of my brothers who are now deceased. Raising sons in the Cabrini Green Project had to be fierce. Mm-hmm. And she made it clear they could not join gangs. They had to be productive citizens, and drugs and fighting and alcohol, all those things that come with poverty was not an option for our family. And in fact, when the Bloods and the Crips moved into Cabrini Green, fighting over territory that neither one of them owned, it was at a point where my brothers both were being forced to choose a side or not have protection in the community. And we literally fled Cabrini Green in the middle of the night because my mother was not going to allow the Bloods or the Crips to get a hold of her sons. Mm-hmm. That was not an option. We have a history of our family taking in aunts and uncles and their children when things go wrong. And we were taken in when things went wrong with her sister, Aunt Betty. It was a pattern. And so you would have a family, for example, my aunt would move in with 6 children. And we had 3 bedrooms. So we had 6 children plus our 5 children, plus my auntie, who was like our nanny and lived with us, and my mother, and then my Aunt Topsy. So all that are living conditions that we were used to. And so, from time to time, we were living on top of each other in the Cabrini Green projects.
Now, people have to understand that these projects, these buildings, were they, as many projects are around the United States, they were very small. They had that long hallway.
Exactly.
They had this long hallway with these small rooms. You could probably fit more people in the hallway between the front room and the back room, but they had these small rooms. And that's that Chicago talk. It's, were you going to be in the front room or are you going to be in the back room?
Well, I'm used to sleeping with someone's feet in my face, literally. Or I would sleep on the floor. I've slept in the bathtub. I've slept with the dirty clothes, just trying to get, enough space. And when we go to the bathroom, now I just listed all these people living in one apartment, one bathroom. We didn't get to go to the bathroom as an individual. One was on the potty, one was at the sink, and one was in the tub to get ready in the morning. There was no privacy. And so we had, but one thing about those women in that house, they knew how to make do. I could never claim that I went without food. I was taught to cook well, economize with the food, share and split food. I mean, we didn't do without the necessities of life.
With that information and your mother being the first Black woman to run for Congress, what do you think she would have brought with her to that Congress seat if she had won? What do you think would have been so different, not about the household, but about the country itself?
Well, my mother was very, very intelligent, and she could recognize systemic racism and call it out in a minute. She would recognize and point out to people how and when they're being discriminated against. Because, a lot of times you don't realize that it is discrimination going on. You just think you were unfortunately not picked for something. She would point out issues in the community that I quite frankly didn't understand. She kept talking about we lived in a food desert. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a grocery store down the street. But I was literally an adult before I realized there was a grocery store down the street, but they did not have healthy food.
Right.
At a reasonable price that we could afford.
And we got to remember, this is the 50s, 60s. This
Right.
this is not 1990. This is not 2000. We're talking understanding there was already food deserts in the 40s and the 50s.
Exactly. And so, I mean, when I say we ate well, I meant we ate pig feet, in the greens, a lot of pork and everything. Very poor eating habits.
Mm-hmm.
I just always remember we would have our meat rationed to us, and my mother would always say, "Let Sam have the extra meat. He's a growing boy." And I'm like, "Well, what am I?" The boys were treated different in some respects. So my mother would point out in the community when people would complain about the filth in our community. But she would point out that you didn't have trucks coming through our community cleaning the streets.
You didn't.
And picking up anything.
No.
It's not that they didn't have trash in all communities. They just didn't service our community. Same thing she would point out about snow removal. If we fall and break an arm or a leg, it's just so what? But, we didn't get the service of, street cleanup like everyone else. And we weren't hired for those positions. We were labeled and streamed into being on welfare.
So as we know, in many political seasons, as you've been watching the different administrations that have passed between your mother when she ran for Congress to all these different electoral seats, and still so many people, so many in the Black community are not voting. That must disturb you to no end, because they believe that their vote does not matter. How do you speak to that, knowing that your mother was the first Black woman to run for Congress, and to see so many things go down the rabbit hole because people are not being invested? And
right.
If they're not invested, then Black people aren't valued.
Right. And I don't understand it. I really don't. For example, we talk about all the problems in Mississippi.
Yeah, with the water, absolutely.
With the water and everything. There's enough Black people in Mississippi to own that place.
Right.
All you got to do is go vote. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't understand how you get all these.
Well, we know that Mississippi doesn't read very well. If you look at the education record, you look at their school system, and you look at the reading and writability of the young Blacks. We know, you heard this morning in our meeting, just even in Maryland alone, only 24% of Black children in Maryland are prepared to enter kindergarten. The 24%. That's not a lot of kids that's able to start kindergarten. That means the other kids are not prepared. What do I mean by not prepared? They cannot sound out alphabets. They don't know their numbers. We're not talking about arithmetic. We're talking about numbers, saying the alphabet. Only 24% in Maryland. So, Maryland, Mississippi, those numbers are low.
Right. And I don't want to be down on Mississippi. I'm just citing that as an example.
Right.
Because it's throughout the United States where if we pull together, we could run this place. But you got to vote. That is your voice, not violence, not showing up to the polls. These are choices that I spend my life trying to educate people. Just go and vote. You got to be heard. And that was my mother's mantra. Yeah, an active. Yeah. And the thing about, we have a lot of issues in our community. People are always down on the Black man not being there and things like that. It's systemic. There's a reason for it. If he lives in the household and marries you, then you can't get the welfare help. So he can't afford to raise his children, your children, and all that. There are reasons for what's going on. When our Black men are not treated equally to get a job, they're more apt to be put in jail than given a job. It costs more to jail our black men than to educate them. This is by choice, and it's not our choice. But then we sit back and criticize about our family. Our families could be healthy if our system was fair. If we didn't have to go to bed every night afraid that our sons are going to be killed by a cop tomorrow. That's where the high blood pressure comes from. If my son, who's 40 years old now, leaves the house, not in my face, I live in fear that that could be the last time I see him. That's where the high blood pressure comes from. It's not that we're all bad people and doing all the wrong things. It's just that the pressure we have to live on is unlivable. But I had a wise mother that would point these things out so that I didn't have to get on the bandwagon and say our black men are no good. No, our black men are not given equal opportunity to be good.
Before we cut off, I just want to say thank you, Ms. Carmen Jackson, for coming on to Bridges Live and giving people this information. And later, I want this to stew in their heads so they can understand what we've been talking about. You know, in the 1940s and 50s, your mother was the first black woman to run for Congress. That is an amazing feat in its own self. And then to see, not only hear, but to see your mother being dragged down the street by a car intentionally. And yet today, you're not bitter, but you're active. You're not hostile. You're very intentional. You're not sad. You're hopeful. Now, that's something that's not teachable, it seems like, to people. So how do you get people to be as hopeful, as intentional, and as loving as you have been to say, I'm going to still do what I can do for my community, no matter what it is? How do you do?
My mother's rule for us is that nobody owes you nothing. So you can't walk around with this chip on your shoulder, mad at the white man because of what he did or didn't do. All you can do is work to better yourself. That's who you're responsible for. And if you lay down because someone treated you badly, then they'll just roll over you. So you have to stay strong. You have to live by your own rules and expectations. And you can't give in to a community. I was not allowed to do what a lot of my friends were allowed to do, period. If it was dark outside, I was in the house. Okay, there was no option, no in between. More kids stayed at our house, but we weren't allowed to stay a lot of places. We had to be home. But we had lots of company all the time. My mother was the community person that watched a lot of kids over the weekends.
So I hope people get an understanding of this. If you have any questions, you can always contact me at Bridges Live with Dr. Paul Dyer. And I hope people take this and share it, like it, love it, and then talk about it, about what they didn't know, about what the history books haven't told them, about the information that you heard. And then go do your research, go do your listening, go do your due diligence. But I want, if you could take one thing, and Carmen will have to agree with me, go do something for someone to make a difference, because we need you in this fight. We can't do it alone, and we're not supposed to do it alone, but we need you to do something. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Bridges Live. I'm Dr. Paul Dyer, and thank